Something went wrong. This is a nice finish though. Absolutely wild game. Niemann is really good at this. He's good at resisting in lost positions by kind of desperately trying to create counterplay, which is part of his style, that he just always wants complications. Sometimes when you have losing positions, it can be a good strategy to do that, to confuse your opponents, because then you can sometimes turn lost games to wins and not only draws.
It's a beautiful thing. Magnus Carlsen praising Hans Niemann like they're the best of friends. It's almost like he's forgotten about the
$1 million.
They've finally buried the hatchet, but will it be a fairy tale ending for the happy pair? We're about to find out in round 2 of the Chess World Cup. It's tiebreak day. Magnus in the studio watching this wild game. Niemann with black here, and his opponent, starting with the knight out, is the Italian Lorenzo Lorici. Surely he's gonna give us an Italian game. No. He plays the Spanish. Must be a little slip at the board there. What's he doing? Niemann now kicks the bishop back, and for anyone a bit newer to chess, this doesn't win a pawn, well not really. Black wins it straight back. This is back cave mode. Board is greyed out, so let's stick with the actual game. Bishop drops back, knight developing, hits the pawn, castles, sure, take it, but you run into problems and different things. Your king's in the centre, so you're best off getting developed, and now we get takes. What's that all about? Well, it's known as the delayed exchange. Jury's still out on why. Surely you always capture towards the centre. Well, yes, except when you don't. Chess is a hard game to understand at times. This keeps the pawn island together though, and opens the legendary bishop bear. The grandmasters love it, but the pawns are compromised in compensation for white for giving up the bishops. Now we get Chewbacca's favourite move, the Wookiee one. The pawn is legit attacked now, so knight d7 drops back and defends. c3 goes for the massive centre. Niemann fighting back here, and after pawn d4, he's really solved his opening problems. He can just take right now. Or castles, knight c3. Now again, he can take. White's left with a pawn in the centre, sure, but black gets rid of the weaknesses and retains the bishops. But Niemann, the ambitious player that he is, he launches the bouncing bomb down the board. Now a4 is played to tickle it, and b4 you can say, Magnus, you're my hero. The pawn pushes, gains space, encourages the knight forward, and Niemann, after fianchettoing that bishop, gives up this one. He's lost his bishops. We see pawn d5, not the best apparently, but fine, understandable, leaving Niemann with the bad pawns and his bishops are gone. White is just better. Now it gets the question mark, but only if you find f5. Not an easy move to spot, sacking a pawn, opening the attack on your own queen, but apparently this is good because when you split up the pawns, even when knight g5 comes, black's doing okay. But this is scary, trying to play like this. Not found. Niemann brings the rook over here. Bishop g5 hits the queen. f6 is actually very smelly and encourages the bishop round like this. So queen d6 is best. Queen d2 threatens bishop f4, and so Niemann sets up the overpowered camel toe pawn formation, gives this bishop a square because here it's biting on granite, and stops a5 from white. Why is that pertinent? Well, the queen's now kicked to b6, where it stays with the backwards pawn. White can't go a5. Lovely jubbly, but regardless, rook a c1, and black's got some problems. Because this pawn majority here is the source of counterplay against this big white centre, but you can't get it rumbling. Rook a d8 eyes the queen. Queen c2 though, more firepower stopping this pawn pushing. Bishop a6 is played, but the knight rotates around. This square's under lock and key, and what's Niemann to do? He's struggling, he's scrambling, so he sets up this beautiful, overpowered rectangle. Everyone's going nuts. Look at the audience there. It's a beautiful sight. Pawn b3 is played though, and it's the final fourth piece to clamp on this square. Poor Pawny ain't going nowhere. Queen f6 is played. Don't blunder your bishop. Spotted. And now pawn to c6. Niemann reveals why he put the rook there, to try and undermine the centre. But this is just delicious. Look at that for a powerful pawn. The rook now steps back in front of it. You could play the rook over immediately, but this knight rotates, threatening e5, so queen g6 is played, and it's a good sneaky move. If you carry on with e5, it's not ideal to swap the queens. Helps black back into the game. You know, this pawn push could come soon, so this is much better. Pick up a tempo on that queen, which is just badly placed, running short of squares. Then land a knight on f5, worth a pawn, Kasparov used to say. So not only are you not a pawn down, but black's pawns are doubled. Your pawn's amazing. You can start to see why it's like +2, 2 and a bit to white, right? Even though the material's level. I'm a poet and I don't know it. So Niemann plays the explosive c4, desperately fighting back. You could take, but instead we see knight d4, using the weakness of the last move. So the queen moves again, losing so much time. You could now take here. This didn't happen. The reason it wasn't played is although you hit the rook, rook c8, knight takes here, you've won a couple pawns. But now look at the pieces for black. Certainly there's a flow, there's a harmony, there's an initiative. So none of that stuff. We instead saw the incredible pawn e5. Just top move after top move here from Lorenzo. I mean, these 2500 odd GMs are no slouches. Now if you capture the pawn, because you can do this, well, the follow-up is this. There's different moves, but this is one of the main lines. And you go for this mass exchange and then land the fork. So black's got to take, rook recaptures, and you can't actually take the pawn. Take it like this, you get branked, never pleasant. Take it with the queen, where you lose a rook. That is an exchange. White stands better here with takes on c4, of course. Game still needs to be won, but should be a win. So, we didn't see this mass exchange here. There were other lines, by the way, after not taking that pawn that black could play. You know, rook f8, the line goes on, but white stands better when the pawn lives. So we didn't see this. We saw queen g6. Exchange did happen. Now takes on c4. The explosive c5, that didn't work. And you've got a choice. You can hop forward, as seen in the game, or back, as suggested by Magnus Carlsen. Eyeball the weaknesses, play f4 soon, then bishop f2. This is the difference, right, between the absolute top players in the world, or maybe just Magnus, and the lower guys. They see these deep plans. This was played, still good, but it creates counterplay for Niemann. He drops back the bishop. Now the a-pawn's dropping. You can see why Magnus would have kept that control, right? Squeezed his opponent's kahunas. Now we see this pawn pushing to set up the chain. Rook a3 hits the knight and rook b1 defends. You just don't get insight like this elsewhere. Do consider subscribing, and while I'm at it, I need to mention I'm trying to get a little bit antisocial lately, so do have a look at the links below. I'm on TikTok now, Instagram, still can hardly figure out how to use them, but I'm posting a few short videos there. Also on X or Twitter, so I'd really appreciate the follow and some support over there and all that good stuff. Thank you very much. Links down below. Bishop a6 is now played, hitting a pawn, and bishop f2 defends it. Only joking, of course, checking you're still awake after that social media ramble. Now we see this rook defending, or is it? This is where Lorenzo unleashes a thing of beauty. Like I say, how is this guy 2560? Knight takes on c5, a brilliancy, because after takes, you don't do rook takes here, or else the trick is pawn d7, and the rook cannot stop the pawn from queening. At least this one can't. So what about this one, I hear you scream, but then there's this rook sliding over, and you're forcing them off the board. Or, can't do that in fact, you have to give up a rook. This is how the game would go. You're only in exchange down, but it's too much. You know, white would win a position like this. Bishop's hit. Okay, so we didn't see takes. We saw bishop takes on c4. Note the opposite coloured bishops. Gives drawing chances. But white is still 2 pawns ahead. Eddie and Deirdre, they're dangerous. Especially this one. It's 2 squares away. So this is still winning for white. The rook slides behind. These leave the board. And now d7's a big threat. So bishop here. You can't push it. Or rook goes. Pawns dropping. So this sets up the threat. d7 on the way, blockaded. Now rook b1, about to invade. The king runs over, and invading with the rook is best. But we see bishop c7, and now you're going to see why Lorenzo's 25-60 and why Niemann's not the best in the world. It's at these kind of crunch endgame moments, low on the clock, they can't quite find the absolute best moves. No criticism, I certainly couldn't do any better. Not unless I'd had a good strong cup of tea. No, I really couldn't. The pawn's about to expand. Bishop d5. Here's the expansion, but Niemann goes for the exchange. He wants this opposite colour bishop's endgame. Declined. We're not stopping on every question mark. There's so many. f5 check. And how about that? That is a sneaky, sneaky move. I mean, it's right up there with the away from the board sneak check that Nigel Short played against an angry Kasparov way back in the 1990s.
Scratch of the head here from Nigel Short, checks with the queen. Lovely jumper he's sporting there, knitted by Nana. Scribbles his lunch order, mushrooms, Kasparov rushing back. He realises he forgot to add the extra chicken. And who's this stiff in the suit? Damn, he thinks, I should have ordered the mushrooms and chicken soup. Uncle Victor knows. Here he comes with the upside down smile. You went wrong there, son.
So what's the point? Well, after takes, pawn recaptures. If king goes, then we've got a runner. And how do you stop it? You don't. You have to start giving up rook, or giving the rook here rather. So no takes. King steps back. King e3 not best, but only if you find the absolutely outlandish pawn to g5. Okay. This was played in the game, human chess. King d4 hits the bishop, it retreats, and now defending the pawn looks natural. But a really nice manoeuvre is found, bishop e1, saying please take my pawn. I'm then going rook a7, and you've got some problems. Won't go down all those lines, but you can't give that initiative to white. So f6 was tried. Also isn't the best move, but it tries to break up these pawns. Now there's the phenomenal pawn e6 check, because if takes, there's rook c1, and it's like, hang on a minute, okay, can't I win your pawn and sort of do some checks? No, this is check and mate. Just the most ridiculous lines that the engines find. That's why it's the Stockness monster. Not found. This was found. Takes with check. King recaptures. Rook check. And this is the moment where it all goes wrong. King f4. You should have stepped to d4. This is natural, of course, to come round like this, but the pawn just drops. Niemann's right back in the game. Check. Surely this is now a draw. Not the right move, apparently, but still, opposite colour bishops. Bouncing the bishop to d4 best. Not found. This is the game continuation. They're scrambling low on time, but they do get 5 seconds to move. And now with the pawn under fire here, Niemann finds the absolute best move. It's rook e4. Now that is a high quality move, because if you take, then there's bishop takes on f5. King takes, rook takes. This is a theoretical draw once the pawns are mopped up. This isn't enough. So, we run back. It's spotted. We get takes on c8, given the double question marks of doom, as you can see. Because after king captures, rook captures, bishop takes there. And now this position with rook against 2 pawns and bishop, it's a theoretical draw. Niemann runs the king over. This is the game. This one stepping in. Now the bishop blocking, but it was in this position that the fairy tale ending for Magnus and Hans just crumbled apart. Niemann played the most natural rook g1. And he should have gone to one of these 2 squares. Because now after pawn f6, Rook f1 coming behind the pawn to stop f7 check. You know, you're covered. Bishop e3, black's got a problem. You want to check the king, and that is a drawing position, but you can't do it. The bishop's covering g1. That's why if the rook had been on this rank or this rank, then you're okay, right? You can check, or bishop e3 is not an available move without losing the piece. But as it is here, you go rook f3, but there's a winning continuation. Pawn h7 check. Now, if you go this way, you make a queen. So you have to blockade the pawn. And now f7 is the point. And none of the tricks work for black. Okay, what if you execute the threat that you were threatening? That's mate. Okay, what if instead you take the pawn, going for something a bit sneaky? Well, don't take. Then the king takes, and this is just a draw. But instead, check. And the king's got no moves. You have to block with the rook on either square, and this is a mate. That's a very pretty one. So in the game, Niemann tried a check. The bishop now blocked, and we saw resigns. Because again, if you try this, and this, and this, then it's not enough. One of them can go through. And if you try this to come behind the pawn, then you can check once more. You have to give up. And now here, just don't make a queen. That is some stale meat. You have to make a rook and do it like this. Or just go with the king and then make the queen. So, final position was here. Hans Niemann is knocked out of the Chess World Cup. More dramatic games happened as well. Wesley So's gone, Jan Nepomniachtchi, some other big names, right? Nihal Sarin. It's always a nuts competition. Hope you enjoyed, and have a look at the video on screen if you want to see another incredible game of chess by the man himself, Magnus Carlsen. Thanks a lot, and see you soon. Cheers.